Good afternoon, everyone. This is Max Smith with 501c Services. We welcome you to today's webcast, Nonprofit Recruitment, the New Normal. We have a very dynamic crew with us today, and we're looking forward to answering a lot of your questions and maybe even creating some more that you didn't even realize you should be asking. Today's webcast is brought to you by 501c Agencies Trust. They're America's leading nonprofit unemployment program. What this organization does is they help 501c3s leave their state unemployment taxation system, which allows them to save tens of thousands of dollars a year in taxes. I have a couple housekeeping items before I introduce our speakers. First of all, you'll notice on your screen now in the bottom left corner is a question box. That's where you can ask our speakers questions, so please feel free to type in there as liberally as you like. We will try to get to as many as possible today. If you're watching our session on demand, you can also type in questions into that question box, and our speakers will address your questions via email. Today's session is worth 1 hour of HRCI credit towards your PHR, SPHR. Once you've attended the entire session, either live or on demand, an email will be sent to your inbox using the email that you used to register with how to get that 1 hour of credit. You'll also see on your screen some event resources in the bottom left corner. Those are from our speakers and their organizations, which is also a PDF of today's presentation. So please feel free to access those documents to learn more about our speakers and their organizations. And we will have some future webcasts emailed to you. Please feel free to attend as many as you like. They're always free. We cover human resources, finance, and operations topics for the nonprofit sector. And like I said, they're always free. So I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers. First up today is going to be Emily Shelley. She's a manager with the DC branch of Careers and Nonprofits, and she's been there for a little over 4 years, and she helps nonprofits, job seekers, and organizations get together. She has a large staffing team, and as I was talking to her this morning, she's in the middle of conference season, so she's been doing a lot of staffing for conferences. Our second speaker today is Dawn Taylor. Dawn has been in the staffing industry and recruitment industry for over 20 years. I guess we could call Dawn a job creator because she's filled more than 25,000 positions in her career, all levels of organizations and all types of organizations, not just nonprofits. And our final speaker this morning is Scott Beal. He's the founder of a very dynamic organization called Atlas Corps. He's a leadership development program for the world's best social change professionals. It's sometimes referred to as the Reverse Peace Corps, and you'll hear more about that in his presentation today, but it's a very exciting organization. And talking to him this morning, they have been very, very busy over the past couple of months. So that said and done, we'll go ahead and hand this presentation on over to Emily. Emily, you ready?
I am. Thank you, Mac. Wonderful. Well, it's exciting to be here today to speak in more detail on the war on talent. This is certainly a hot topic within nonprofit hiring and staffing, something that we as a firm are monitoring daily and also just really keeping an eye on trends in order to better educate our clients on the hiring decisions that they're making. So having been in the industry as a company now for 9 years, this is definitely not the first time that we're seeing the war on talent. However, I will say it's definitely becoming more difficult, not only for nonprofits to find the talent they're looking for. A skills assessment, a fit within a new employee goes beyond just skills on the resume. It's definitely about chemistry, education, and that's just becoming more and more prevalent as nonprofits look to bring more staff on board. And in addition to that, it's also becoming harder to hire staff as well as harder to retain them. So we'll get through that a little bit more. But first, we can't talk about the war on talent without really looking at more information on the generation gap. So as of Q1 in 2015, so essentially January of this year, the Millennials surpassed Generation X to become the largest share of the American workforce. So currently, about 1 in 3 American workers today are millennials, which is huge. And it's also anticipated that by 2025, millennials will make up about 75% of the workforce. So organizations that are not taking time to really assess the trends of millennials, thinking about as a generation, what are some main characteristics that are going to help us not only better hire this generation, but also retain them, are certainly falling behind. And some standard characteristics I would say are millennials are definitely looking for change quickly within their roles. So we're definitely seeing more of the millennial generation move into senior level positions more quickly than previous generations. And in addition to that, their expectations around work-life balance are different, and also their loyalty within an organization typically lies within their peers, whereas with Gen Xers, typically they're more loyal to their managers. So I hope that's some insightful information that just gives you a brief insight into the millennial generation. But it's definitely in organizations' best interest to really build more of a retention plan and strategy specific to all generations, but really just be prepared for millennials to essentially take over. In addition to that, within nonprofit recruitment, the process is changing, as are candidates' expectations. About 79% of job seekers dislike long recruitment processes. And that might seem obvious, but that doesn't necessarily mean organizations are adapting to that. If you're taking, the standard 30 to 60 days to hire for top talent, you might really miss out on some key candidates for your organization. So candidates are moving on if organizations are taking, over the 30-day mark to hire. They're seeing other offers. They're losing interest in your organization. So we have really done more of a job to educate our clients on what an interview process should look like. Interviews, if there's going to be multiple rounds, should be scheduled back-to-back. And I would typically recommend eliminating any sort of unnecessary steps, which if you're working with other firms to hire for staff, they might already be doing the phone screen, and that's definitely something you can cut out of your process. And with the 30 to 60-day average period to hire new staff, again, really working to cut that down because we're seeing placements happen within 2 to 3 weeks, and that's certainly at all levels, entry to executive. Also, candidates have higher expectations. Job seekers are interviewing employers just as much as you're interviewing them. So they're really doing their homework on organizations, looking into your branding, especially social media, which is particularly popular among the millennial generation. And also I'm hearing from more and more clients how Glassdoor and Yelp reviews can work against them. So it's good to be aware of what your reputation is within the community. In addition to that, as I somewhat alluded to on my previous slide, candidates are definitely being mindful of how they're being treated in the interview process. So what is the candidate experience? And what I typically recommend to my clients is that they set the expectations as far as what the interview process will be like for candidates at the beginning of those conversations. So explaining about how many rounds you're anticipating, who you think they'll need to meet with, so on and so forth, just so that candidates are aware of where they stand with you. And in addition to that, we're definitely seeing more candidates ask about opportunities for growth, work-life balance, information on turnover within an organization. So I would recommend either being prepared with this information or build it into your interview process when speaking to candidates about you as an employer. In addition to that, job seekers are definitely getting more comfortable putting feelers out for new opportunities. So we're definitely seeing positions come through at all different levels. We have a good combination of searches that we're conducting at the executive level as well as the entry level. And as I note here on my slide, niche or high-level candidates are definitely in demand. There's a lot of movement at the leadership level, so I encourage organizations to think about how they're attracting, retaining, and then planning for any sort of turnover at the leadership level, so succession planning, so that you don't fall behind when it comes to really filling these important positions for your organization. In addition to that, it's noted that about 48% of mid-level positions are filled by candidates moving on from other nonprofits. So it's definitely becoming more and more of a trend that nonprofits are investing in turnover. So if a current employee can't find that opportunity for growth, a raise, or work-life balance, they will definitely find it elsewhere. And excuse me, I meant to say that more nonprofits are investing in overhead, not turnover. That would be counterproductive. But with that being said, candidates definitely are finding what they are looking for ideally within other organizations. So it's definitely in our clients' best interest to have those current conversations with staff about what they're really looking for in their role and how an organization can retain them. And finally, within nonprofit recruitment, I definitely warn my clients about counteroffers as well as other offers that candidates could potentially be considering. Right now in the job market, about 11% of active candidates expect a counteroffer from their current employer, which might not seem like a lot, but certainly if that's something that you're not aware that a candidate is considering, it could definitely throw you off when it comes to really closing in on an offer. And currently about 40% of job seekers are receiving other offers. So again, it's in your best interest to have an expedited, thorough, efficient hiring process. And finally, salary is definitely not the only deciding factor when it comes to a candidate making a decision as to whether or not to accept your offer. So it's, again, in your best interest to really talk through benefit packages with your potential new hires early on in the conversation so you know what they're really looking for. Open lines of communication is always key.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Emily. We'll get back to you later with some questions from our audience, but now we're going to go ahead and throw it to Dawn. Dawn, just let me know when you want your slides advanced, and I'll go ahead and do that for you at my end.
Okay, we can start now. Hi, as Mac said, I'm Dawn Taylor, and I have been in the recruitment and talent acquisition space for over 20 years now. I've seen this space go from what we call old school to this new age and new way of vetting via social media. But first I want to get into getting back to basics, talking a little bit about the social media rise and how this can be counterproductive to our vetting and recruitment practices. Why should we get off social media? I'm going to give you my top 3 reasons. High volume responses, low volume matches. Anybody in the world with internet access can see your postings, many of them from unqualified candidates. You now have to take the time to go through each email, wade through every application just to reject probably about 90% of them. You know, when this interesting world of internet posting hit the recruiting world, I too thought, wow, this is bigger than the Red Sea. My glee turned into pretty much horror when I posted a job, got about 500 to 1,000 resumes, and only 5 of them were even remotely in the realm of what the specs of the job was. And now with the unemployment rate still really high in most states, this is even a bigger problem for recruiters. It's way too time-consuming. We need to augment that with some old-school traditional styles, like building a referral database, referral incentives, getting our hands on certain people with those high-end or niche specifications. We need to get back out into our market. The second thing is it's too impersonal. Much of the online recruiting process involves emails, phone interviews, and the like. It's difficult for an employer to determine if a candidate will be a good fit culturally. Remember, most people leave jobs not because of skill. They leave because of fit. So because of that, you have candidates that only get into the office after all of the hard legwork has been done over phone, email, Skype, however you do it, and they have no attachment to that culture. So the shelf life for that candidate is going to be, it's pretty low. Legal issues. I will talk about legal issues of everything throughout my entire presentation because I think that this is one that's very overlooked when it comes to social media. Recruiters have to be careful not to use any information that they wouldn't normally consider during the hiring process. The problem with social media is it contains information about a person's age, race, religion, and everything else that is covered under the protected class. A slip-up of a protected characteristic during the hiring process could lead to litigation, regardless of whether the recruiter actually took the protected characteristic into consideration. Save that one because that's a big one. Every state is different, and you really have to be careful about what you're saying to your potential candidates when you're vetting them off of social media. I know I found one of my recruiters a couple of weeks ago who was vetting being LinkedIn, and I think the candidate had something about their family was going on some type of a trip. We all want to break the ice when we're vetting candidates. Well, when you're using social media, the only ice you can break is what you've seen on their social media pages. That could lend to litigation. Recruiters and employers must also be familiar with the off-duty laws in their states. At least 28 states prohibit employers from taking adverse employment action based on employees' candidates' lawful off-duty conduct. So we've all seen these less than savory pictures on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Well, if it is not during the work hours, we cannot really use that as a basis of whether this person is a unsavory candidate, character, will represent our brand well or not. It is critical for recruiters to understand these laws and refrain from considering any protected activities in their hiring processes. I said earlier that we need to get back to the old school ways of doing things. And one of those ways that I think is not being utilized by recruiters is building a good referral program and a referral network. Referral programs and a good referral network can do wonders for a recruiter. I actually live by it. A referral tends to have higher retention rates, more in-depth employee engagement, and will pay it forward with more referrals, hence making your job a heck of a lot easier. Here are a couple of things that you can do quickly. Build a pipeline of the right people to make right referrals. Recruiters have to vet the right people to make referrals. People seem to flock around like people. So make sure you're vetting people who are right, who you deem as right. That means you have to get out and meet the people that you want to make the referrals to your organization. They need to know your organization, take some time and have them come in and do tours, let them see your culture so they can really give you the right types of referral for your organization. By doing this legwork up front, this will ensure a steady pipeline of great candidates that not only have the skill, but also fit your company organization. Treat your referral network like a client. You know, getting a thank you for your referral card is nice. However, if you have a great referral network, I suggest you ramp up your rewards and your incentives. This could be as simple as a lunch or as big as a referral contest with monthly rewards and incentives. There is no person out there that doesn't like to get a prize. So even with your referrals, even if they're not inside of your company, if they're outside, and I say think outside of the box with your referrals, your referral network. Have a good reward system because they will continue to make sure that they are referring people to you. Lastly, proactively encourage referrals. In order to generate a constant flow of talent, an employee referral program must be encouraged. Request referrals from new employee hires immediately. Create notifications to go out to your referral network consistently and keep them aware of the needs of your organization. Your referral network should be an extension of your recruiting and vetting process in your company. It should not be, we've tried to vet for this particular job for the last 3 months, let's reach out to people. That is not strategic. It's once a month, once a quarter, your top referral people. Bring them in, have meetings with them, and let them understand the scope and the flow of what's going on in your next quarter. Lastly, and this is one, I hope I don't have department heads on here, but I say this loud and proud, Give the recruiting back to the recruiters. Take it out of the departments. Here's a few reasons. One, recruiters recruit all day, every day. Recruiters are trained on each department in your organization. They understand the fit and culture of the organization. A department manager is hiring for his or her own department and not likely thinking about the lifespan of the candidate for your company. Opportunities for growth can be missed without the recruiter who will be looking at this person for a company fit as opposed to a department fit. And that goes to retention, employee engagement, and employee's lifespan or shelf life in your organization. Give the recruiting back to the recruiters, or allow them to take a big active role or the lead role in the vetting process. Legal ramifications, and I just had this happen. Department managers, most of them, have not really taken HR law classes or some type of a seminar regarding what can be said or done during the vetting process. Organizations can easily find themselves in the middle of litigation instead of making an employment offer. Because HR or recruiters don't have they're not supervising this process, you never know what's being said during the vetting process. You can do one or two things. Either take it back or really make sure your department heads have been trained in HR and employment law, especially when it is around recruiting and the vetting process and what can and cannot be said. You do not want to be seen as an organization who is allowing the department heads to recruit. One, you're not getting the right people, right candidates. I've heard that. And two, your company is looked upon unsavory because of what the department heads are doing and saying in these interviews. We can talk about all of this a little later when we do Q&A. Thank you, Mac.
Thank you, Dawn. That was really interesting. I know we did have one question pop up real quick, and
sure.
I want to go ahead and give that to you real quick before we send it to Scott.
Okay.
How can a manager or nonprofit justify to donors about offering those incentive and those reward programs that you were talking about? Have you had to address that before in the past?
Yes, and it's tied. It has to be tied some way to either the bottom line, or it can be tied into tenure of lifespan of a candidate. And I have several different metrics that my clients have used, and I would be happy to share that.
Okay, great. Well, I'll get you in touch with Ann from the Anchorage Museum.
Great.
But Scott, are you ready, sir?
I am.
All right, please, sir, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, Mac, very much for this opportunity, and I also enjoyed hearing both Emily and Dawn's comments. What I wanted to bring to the conversation today is a little bit about the importance and the benefits of diversity when it comes to recruiting. This is, of course, true in any sector, but particularly important in the nonprofit sector. Let's actually take a look at how the private sector approaches this issue. And so McKinsey did a study a few years back where they coined this term, the diversity dividend. And this is probably self-evident to most people on this phone, since it sounds like there's a lot of HR and talent people who have called in. But McKinsey's proven it. They've shown in the private sector that companies that are more diverse with more diverse gender, more diverse ethnically, perform better. We know this has been studied both even on the board level and on the staff level, that companies that have more diverse teams end up making more money for those for-profit businesses. One of the nice things about the private sector is that it's easy to track success just by the bottom line. But we know this is true in the private sector, but we also intrinsically know it's true in the nonprofit sector as well. And that it's at least as important for nonprofit organizations to have diverse boards and staffs because often the clients and customers of nonprofits can be even more diverse than in the private sector. One quick, again, parallel from the private sector, when Bill Gates was establishing Microsoft, he didn't look for the best engineer in Seattle, the best white guy who looked like him to help strengthen his company. He ended up looking all around the world. And, brought a guy from India to come to Seattle to invent Hotmail, and they both became billionaires from that process. If we're doing this in the private sector, and we do it every year in the private sector every day, we should be doing this in the nonprofit sector as well, so teams can look as expansively as possible to find the most talented leaders to strengthen their teams, especially from diverse backgrounds. So let's talk a little bit about nonprofit recruitment and some of the roadblocks that exist. First, that there's a high cost for many nonprofit organizations to recruit, especially when you look, well, just in general, especially for smaller nonprofits. Not every organization has a recruiting office or a full-time recruiter on their team. Especially small and medium-sized organizations don't have the bandwidth or capacity to even consider international candidates or international talent to join their team. And it's even difficult very often for a nonprofit to consider outside of their own community, and will often limit their lens through who are the most talented leaders who happen to be graduates of local universities or work at local organizations, and that really limits the talent pool, and particularly limits the religious and ethnic and racial diversity of the candidates who might be coming and applying for your team. So when a nonprofit considers to do the thing that Bill Gates did, to bring someone from overseas to work with them for a year, the overwhelming intimidation of having to sponsor an H-1B visa or go through any lettered visa is too intimidating too often. And frankly, it's often very expensive. While a tech company can justify the $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 it costs to sponsor an H-1B visa and lawyer fees and U.S. government fees, it barely seems worth it from the nonprofit sector. How would you justify that to your board? How would you even work that into your budget? So there's a real issue of, and then even if you could afford it, how would you recruit those folks from overseas? You know, one thing that we look at when we work with organizations on recruiting diverse teams, including especially internationally, is the importance of doing targeted recruitment. So it may very well be that if you're serving an audience that's primarily Latino, you do need to specifically go out there and recruit individuals who not only speak Spanish, but who perhaps have experience and background working with Latino communities, or who in fact may be from a Latino community themselves. This requires recruiting in different websites and in different discussion boards and different LinkedIn groups than your current staff may be a part of. There are ways when you find international people that you can bring them onto your team, and just to go over them, a few of them briefly before getting into a little bit more about Atlas Corps, is that if you find someone, for example, who's a recent college graduate who perhaps is from overseas, the vast majority of international students have an opportunity to stay in the United States for a year or two on what's called OPT, or optional practical training. It doesn't require a complicated sponsorship of H-1B visas, and it's kind of a year that people can, with less paperwork, get some experience in the United States, either before going back to their countries or before applying for a way to stay, such as an H-1B visa. Some nonprofits, especially large international ones, can take advantage of an easier visa that's called an L visa for an intercompany transfer. And I can go into more details on Q&A, but an example of this might be someone who works for Amnesty International in Egypt could also come and serve with Amnesty International in New York on a much easier visa, an L visa. Again, this is usually limited to the largest of organizations, since most smaller nonprofits don't have the international offices overseas that can justify an intercompany transfer. But the nice thing about intercompany transfers is they're not limited in the same way that H-1Bs are by Congress. There's different rules that regulate those. And then finally, another way that people can do it is through a training visa or a J visa, which is actually what Atlas Corps does. And you can bring people over for temporary periods of time, up to 18 months, using a sponsor of a J-1 visa, which is not a long-term strategy for a full-time staff person to be a part of your team, but can be a way to bring diverse talent from abroad. I should say this is all quite confusing when it comes to navigating the immigration laws, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any less confusing with the political climate that exists today and with the presidential campaign, it seems unlikely that immigration is going to get simpler in the years to come, or for that matter, easier. So this can be all very intimidating for nonprofits, even though when you step back and look at the imperative that nonprofit social sector organizations really need to seek diverse teams with diverse backgrounds to often serve a diverse clientele. You know, at Atlas Corps, for about 9 years, we have been helping teams bring diverse leaders from all over the world to serve at their organizations. Prior to my time at Atlas Corps, I worked with the U.S. Department of State, so I learned a thing or two about how to navigate these visas and how to also recruit these candidates from all over the world. We've now placed 350 leaders from 72 different countries on what are typically 12 to 18-month placements. You know, often people think of us as the reverse Peace Corps because we bring people from overseas to volunteer in the United States for a year. Although I must confess, I called it a reverse Peace Corps to a friend of mine in India when I was developing the idea, and he said to me, "I like your idea, but why are you against peace?" So it's not actually the greatest term for us. We're not actually anti-peace. But what we are about is bringing really talented leaders the opportunity to come and serve at really strong organizations and to bring that international talent to a wide variety of diverse organizations. Last year we partnered with the White House and State Department, so now embassies and consulates around the world are recruiting candidates to apply to become Atlas Corps Fellows, and we've placed these leaders at organizations across the country. So whether you're a big international nonprofit like Habitat or a smaller homeless shelter, no matter what the size of your organization, no matter what the mission, we know that bringing a diverse individual from overseas can not only help bring different language skills and different professional experiences, but also new ideas, also new ways to challenge old problems that we're facing in this sector that are, quite frankly, usually global challenges, even if it's at a domestic organization. The challenges of engaging people via social media or fundraising or leveraging constrained resources. These are similar challenges that professionals overseas have been dealing with as well. So what we try to do at Atlas Corps is encourage people to think expansively. Think expansively when it comes to how do you staff up your team, and think expansively to where you're recruiting the talent necessary to advance your mission. Whenever possible, if you can bring an individual with a different background than yours, a different experience than yours, just like the private sector, we've seen in Atlas Corps that it can strengthen the nonprofit sector and, most importantly, strengthen your organization's mission in a very powerful way. Happy to take more questions as we get to that part of the presentation.
Wow, that was a lot to digest, Scott. And I can tell everybody, working with Scott over the past couple of weeks, putting this presentation together, a very busy guy and a very busy team. I kind of wanted to stay with you, Scott. You're getting applications worldwide for your program. Have you seen that people from certain areas of the globe generally have stronger skill sets? And I mean, we don't want to stereotype people, but do you see analytics like that, saying a person from this country is really stronger at this skill set?
In some ways, yes. And sometimes organizations come to us with those preconceived expectations in mind. Perhaps they're looking for a tech leader to come and support their nonprofit work and assumed that Atlas Corps would be a good way to bring somebody from South Asia that's producing, tens of thousands of engineers every year, many of whom are also mission-driven individuals who'd be quite pleased to serve at a nonprofit for a year. Or sometimes organizations come and they say, we're doing global health work in Africa, and it seems to make sense to us that we'd have someone from Africa on our team, as opposed to a group of people sitting in Boston coming up with answers for malaria or HIV/AIDS in Africa. So it's certainly the case that in some of the areas that you might expect, we find lots of engineers from South Asia. We find lots of health professionals from Africa. We find lots of, we have a lot of youth engagement leaders from Latin America, for example. But what's really incredible is that when an organization says to us, we're really just looking for someone who's a really strong social media individual, who's a really effective communicator. Well, that allows us to pull from close to 10,000 people applied this year for about 100 positions at Atlas Corps. So literally thousands of strong candidates have applied, and we may send to them an Egyptian who helped bring down the Egyptian government in Tahrir Square, as well as a Brazilian, as well as a Spaniard, who are all really not only effective social media leaders, but also quite proficient in English and quite mission-driven to the mission the organizations are asking us for. So the fact is, it's a big world, and there's a lot of people out there that, just like Americans like to serve overseas, want to use their talent and skills the way to advance your organization's missions.
Oh, wow. That's an excellent resource, and I would invite anybody who's interested in it to please contact Scott and his team. We're in our panel discussion period. We have our Q&A coming up, so if you have something popped into your head and you need a question answered, please feel free to share it with us, and we'll address that. Dawn, if I could get back to you, just, I guess, a little bit of housekeeping on Dawn. Dawn had promised that she would provide some metrics in her session about explaining to donors about how offering the incentive program can help with recruiting. And if you'd like to get those items from Dawn, please share that in the chat box, and we will add your name to the list, and we'll forward those to Dawn, and she can get back to you. We've done that already for a couple of people. But Dawn, if I could get back to one thing that you mentioned in your presentation about taking the hiring back from whatever a hiring manager is doing it currently and giving it back to a recruiter or an HR professional. There's got to be politics involved in that. How do you address those types of things? Joe over in accounting has been doing his own hiring for 50 years, and even though he has a terrible record, no one wants to approach him on maybe taking back or helping him. How do you bridge that?
You bridge it very gently, Matt. I've had several cases where organizations have had to, because they're not running properly, because the departments are not vetting properly. And the turnover rate, if you look at a lot of these organizations, are very, very high. It actually comes from the top, the COO and the board, who really have stake and claim in changing these processes. Mac, you're absolutely right. Some of these organizations, the departments have been doing it for years. Others, they've taken away so much in the HR department because it's considered overhead that they've allowed this to happen because recruiters and HR employees are inundated. Again, the problem is legal ramifications. Are we getting the proper personnel? How are we keeping track of what works and what does not when you have, say you have 20 departments, so you have 20 different department heads that are allowed to vet and recruit? How do you even create a metric around that? So I think it starts from the top. I think those conversations start at a seat at the table, and I think it takes an HR director or a manager who realizes that this is not a good hiring practice. And then they may call in someone like me or an HR consultant or a recruiting consultant that has that kind of conversation with the right people in the organization.
Got you. Great. I appreciate that. I know that a lot of our audience probably has those people in their organization. They might be in there and they might be embedded, and you just got to massage them out, I guess, huh?
Yeah, or partner with them. I spoke to a recruiter last week who is trying to revamp their recruiting process, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can be a partnering where the recruitment department or the lead recruiter or HR practitioner is overseeing that process. Also, there has to be some teaching in that. If the departments are going to continue to recruit and vet candidates, there has to be a seminar or some type of class on employment law and the ways and means of recruiting and vetting. It's really, really important, especially now where social media has taken over, and I think all of you know how I feel about that right now.
we got the message on that, Dawn. Appreciate it. But Emily, turning to you real quick. First of all, one quick question from the audience. Can you share with us, do you know off the top of your head, the years for the millennial generation, their birth years?
Yes, absolutely. Most commonly, millennials are defined between the years of 1982 and 2004, so born between that time frame.
Okay. So the young bucks in the office, right?
Right, exactly.
You mentioned in your section negotiation. You brought up negotiation. Can you expand on that a little bit more? Since we just talked about millennials real quick, and millennials are a way that a lot of people are getting a lot of clicks on their websites. You put millennial in an article header, and for some reason people read it because they seem to be scared of these young people for some reason or worry about them. But how has that group, or how has it changed the art of negotiation right now? How has that changed? Does the current job pool expect to be able to come back and say, no, I would like more time at home, or I would like more money? How has that changed over the past couple of years?
Sure. Well, I think just to, generally state or answer, yes, absolutely. I mean, they are changing the game when it comes to that. And a lot of times they come in probably expecting salaries higher than what some of their coworkers from other generations expected when they were entering the workforce. And a lot of that, is definitely just a trait of the millennial generation. I mean, we are a millennial company. We love millennials here, but by nature, millennials definitely tend to feel they need that gold star. I mean, it's a lot about how they were brought up and, what type of world they were living in when they were younger. So, I mean, I think organizations have definitely had to adjust in that sense and be prepared for millennials to come back, asking for either a higher salary or more vacation time. And a lot of times we advise our clients, hey, you don't have to go up in terms of what you're offering, but if you could throw in maybe some more flex time, millennials are very much a generation that can work from anywhere. And, not just specifically to millennials, I think definitely that's across the board, but, certainly they're much more likely to leave at 3 p.m. if they don't have anything to do in the office and, take the rest of the day to answer interviews from home or take calls from home or even text, their team members about certain project timelines and, requirements to see the work through. So it's definitely a different communication style on that end, but if organizations are giving them more opportunity for that, they're definitely, again, not just only having to offer more in terms of salary. So throwing in an extra week of vacation or even a couple days here, a lot of times I motivate my staff, by giving them a half day out of the office, and that just goes over extremely well, and I think it motivates them to just get more work done, knowing that I can be flexible as their supervisor, but the expectations, of course, remain the same.
Got you. Excellent. Thank you so much for expanding on that. The way that the market has kind of changed with the art of negotiation, people are expecting to be able to give a little pushback, and sometimes, like you said, that pushback is, I want more time out of the office.
Right.
So that's important to know when you're trying to get new talent on board. So the questions are coming in. Keep them coming. We probably won't be able to get to all of them, but our speakers are here to help. They've donated their time, and we really appreciate that. So we're going to try to, once we get off, once we run out of time at 1 o'clock, if we still have any outstanding things, we will try to address them offline with you through email. So please keep them coming, and we'll try to put you in contact with the right person who might be able to help you out. But let's start. Scott, you saw one come through the answer queue that you wanted to address from Lisa. If you want to go ahead and tackle that one.
Great. Lisa asked a good question about how to reconcile the desire to have a short and quick application and placement process with also the desire to find diverse talent. And I think it's a great question, because I would agree that the candidates these days will move on to something else if the process takes too long. And so I think whether it's domestically or internationally, finding an organization to work with can help speed up that process. So, I mean, at Atlas Corp, for example, we used to bring fellows once a year. in September every year, and then we determined that, not everyone wants to start a fellow exactly in September or leave their job exactly in September. So now 3 times a year in January, May, and September, every 4 months, we're placing a new class of international leaders at nonprofits and even for-profits all across the country. And that, for us, we're never more than 4 months away from a start date, so it helps shrink the timeline for when it goes from application to placement, both for the candidate and for the host organization. So fundamentally, you can't do an international placement in 2 or 3 weeks because the visa takes too long. But with the right partner, an organization like Atlas Corps or others, it can still be done in a timely way so that that international candidate doesn't go off to another job. I also wanted to chime in real briefly on the social media piece because there are a few questions on that as well. I would say I probably have a slight difference of opinion when it comes to how important social media it is with recruiting candidates. And this is particularly true in the diversity space as well. Candidates, especially young candidates, but also candidates from overseas, and I think probably all candidates these days, are looking at an organization's Facebook page. They're looking at an organization's LinkedIn presence and their Twitter accounts. And while certainly most people don't use this as a basis for deciding whether to apply for or accept a job offer, it goes into the overall larger calculus of, is this the type of organization that I'm excited about? Organizations have missions online, but does it look like they're living those missions in the updates that I see in their Facebook post? This organization has a really big budget and seems to talk a good game, but can I actually see the work that they're doing from their Instagram account and the pictures of the clients that they're serving? So it doesn't have to be a primary part of your recruiting process per se, but I think that your recruitment can really be hurt if it's not part of your organization's overall communication strategy. So probably a self-evident point, but I do think it feeds into recruitment.
Excellent. Thank you for addressing those 2 questions. Another one, if you all can see in the answer question queue from Larry, he's dropped a pretty big one on us here. Recruiting most non-clinical and clinical positions in the healthcare industry is fairly easy. What are the strategies for recruiting physicians given that the ACA has added at least 30 million more people in need of healthcare across the nation, causing shortages with physicians and other staff? And it's a really highly competitive area as well. Do you all have any quick thoughts for Larry on what he can do to perhaps gain some strategic advantage in that sector?
I'll chime in since I paused a bit to see if anyone else would chime in first. But, Larry, we have brought doctors from overseas to U.S. nonprofits, and precisely for this reason, is that it's very difficult to find medical professionals. And so, there's limits of exactly what a doctor from overseas would do in the U.S., so it really depends on your organization and the need that you have. But Susan G. Komen for the Cure was seeking a health professional from Africa, and we brought a doctor from Sudan to serve with them for 1.5 years. In fact, it was the only medical doctor serving in their international affairs office. And Mohammed had such an amazing experience, they ended up hiring him back in Africa, back in Sudan, to lead Susan G. Komen's efforts overseas, or at least in Africa. So, again, it depends immensely on what type of medical work needs to be done and exactly to the scope of medical work that you need this individual to do. But I'm simply Scott at atlascorps.org, and if there's a way that we can help find some medical professionals for you, we'd love to do it.
Dawn, you had spoken about the pipeline. That's one of your favorite things to talk about. We have a question here from a small organization wondering how those small groups who might have to fight internal politics, maybe even a little bit of nepotism and other conflicts of interest internally, how can they keep a great pipeline together?
As I said, it doesn't, if we're looking at a pipeline and rewarding your pipeline, this is where I would say you need boots to the ground. I think recruiters, we've gone into our shells of sitting behind our desk and looking at 1,000 resumes, but we really don't get out into the communities much anymore. Networking functions. There are so many different conferences and meetings that we should be attending and walking the floor. So everything doesn't have to have a money base to it. but the more you meet, it's just like meeting new friends. The more people you meet, the more you're out, the more you're going to be able to expand your pipeline. I'm very big on boots to the ground and the old school style of meeting people. We all attach ourselves to whom we like. So if I like you and I love your mission and we have a connection with skill and cultural fit, then I'm going to keep you around. The second thing is someone you met a year ago, you should be staying in contact with. It costs nothing to pick up the phone or send a card saying, I'm still thinking about you. I don't have a position here. What are you doing now? What are your plans in the next year? So those are all really good ways to build your pipeline without it costing your organization money.
Yeah, it sounds like it just can't be a static process, right, Dawn? It has to be a continuous.
Cannot.
Yeah, okay, great. Emily, I have a question directed to you. You talked about how applicants these days, they don't like the long process. We know that we have the analytics. We know how long it takes to hire a CEO, a middle manager, a receptionist. We know that those have time frames, and we know that candidates don't like, waiting that long. How do you suggest cutting down on that maybe 30 to 60-day hiring process when it involves background checks, driver license checks, drug screens, credit checks? How do you suggest organizations can cut down on that process so that they don't alienate candidates who don't want to wait?
Sure. Well, I certainly understand how some of the additional background checks are essential to all roles. And, I can't necessarily speak to the driver checks as well as the drug screening. We don't typically place positions that involve that as often, but certainly what we had to do as a company when we noticed just our regular background checks were taking a little bit longer, we just spoke with our vendor and researched our options in terms of expediting any of those timelines and certainly sending that information to applicants who we are moving forward with in the hiring process beforehand, so they know that it's part of the process and know that, we would like them to get back to us with the application we need to process the checks and any other sort of important information as soon as possible. So just setting very clear timelines around all of that. And then I would say if that's not necessarily an option or anything that you can expedite, when it really comes down to it, setting expectations is key. And I think that that's where I see a lot of my clients take a misstep. They're not quick in terms of getting together with their team after interviews are happening and debriefing. Telling the candidates, okay, we met today and this is what the next steps would be. And again, even from the initial conversation with that candidate that they're interested in, just being very clear as to how long you think the interview process would last and just trying to gain a stronger understanding of any other positions or hiring processes they're currently involved in. And that will certainly help you to manage a tighter timeline if necessary in terms of, potentially risking losing out on some really top talent.
Excellent. So set their expectations. Excellent.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for maybe one more. Open to everybody here if anybody wants to address it. Helping getting employees to help the organization, find its next candidates. Is there any advice out there to how to instruct employees or maybe train them in the art of networking? I know we have, employee referral programs. Can anybody speak to those and how those can help organizations find their next position?
This is Dawn. I think this is one that could be huge for any organization. With employee that is a part of your organization is your own walking advertisement. I think that with just a little coaching on what you need, what the organization is looking for. I know I talk to at least 15 to 20 people a day. Out of those 15 to 20 people, and I'm not talking about what I do for a living, which is talent acquisition, I'm talking friends. And out of those people, I cannot tell you how many times I hear, you know what, I'm about to leave my job. I know a friend that's going to leave. I know my cousin is coming here from another state. I think it just takes a little bit of encouragement. I talked about touching and tickling people consistently. If human resources or recruiters put out just an email once a quarter, hey, we're looking for people like you, that would tickle people and remind them that I work for an organization that wants people like me. And I think that's just an easy way, employees that already work with you, a very easy way for you to get the referrals that you want and keep your pipeline full.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much. Well, we're out of time. You all filled this hour full of a lot of useful information. I really appreciate everybody's effort and time as we put this together. Also to the audience, keep the questions coming, especially if you're in an on-demand session. We're happy to forward those to anybody and everybody. And don't forget that we do this monthly. It's usually a Monday at the end of the month. With the holidays coming, we're a little bit more flexible. Our November session is on the audit experience for nonprofits. And if you have a finance person in your organization who has a CPA, it's actually going to be worth an hour worth of CPE credits. So please pass that on. And once again, from 501c Service, I'd like to thank Dawn, Emily, and Scott. You guys were great. We really appreciate you all being here. To everybody else, we'll catch you next webcast.